When I was born, everything was fine until like a nurse was listening to the heart and thought something sounded like off. And probably most nurses would just like, oh, it's fine. She did not. She kept trying to listen a little harder. And they sent me from the hospital I was at to another hospital and to eventually Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And they realized that I had a heart issue. I have the aortic stenosis, and I had my aortic valve, instead of having 3 working flaps, there was 2 that worked and 1 that didn't. And so they did a little procedure on me to try to make it a little bigger, but they did realize that at some point I was going to have open heart surgery. So at 2 years old, it was like the same, like a couple weeks after my 2nd birthday, I had open heart surgery at Children's, which my parents describe as the hardest thing they'd ever went through. I am the youngest of 4, and there's a big gap between me and the 3rd one. So there's like 14 years between me and my sister, and 20 between me and the 1st one. So my parents were not expecting that at all. They already were like, oh my God, we're so old. But it wasn't anything to do with that. It was just, this is actually very common for children. It's 1 in 110 babies will be born with CHD, or congenital heart disease. I had a successful surgery. Everything has been working wonderfully, had no problems whatsoever. I've never had to really focus on it. I mean, there's certainly like okay, let's not overwork yourself, but I just was never into sports anyway, so it wasn't killing me on that. We had our first son, Alexander, and we were over the moon because we just were so excited. I was like, I wanted the girl, but then when I found out it was a boy, I'm like, no, this is going to be awesome. This is wonderful. And we had our 20-week appointment. And they're testing everything and making everything. They go 5 fingers, 5 toes. Oh, it's perfect. And they kept making me get up like to walk around. They're like, oh, he needs to move. So I would get up and they'd try to look again. And then eventually they realized what the nurse had saw and had brought in the doctor, and they kept getting me to get up because they wanted to get the best view, is that the blood flow in his heart was off. The arteries, the transposition of the great arteries is what he ended up having, which was another form of CHD. Not necessarily related to mine, but it's probably genetics, because it all can be. And so when they told us that, I just remember just going into that one room and just breaking down, because I thought my worst nightmare is happening. That I thought, oh my God, I did this to him because I have CHD. So I had to be the one. It's not James that has it. I have it. I must have done this to him. I had to have done something wrong. And I thought everything, I didn't know what to expect. We went to Children's National at that point, and they verified it. And it was the hardest thing when that doctor walked in, because she's like, he has transposition of the great arteries, but it's fixable. And we thought, okay. And they're like, no, we can fix this. This is not the worst thing to have. It's not great, but it's not the worst. And so then we just planned that I was going to be induced and everything would be, fine when he was born. I was induced. I had him. I was prepped the whole time that my doctors told me that, like, oh, well, you can't hold him because he's going to be blue and we're going to need to work right away to get him over to Children's. And I had told my doctor that, and she was like, and she knew I was full of anxiety, but she eventually was like, I'm just going to let her hold. So I got like 10 seconds with him when he was first born. And then he went over to Children's, and then 3 days later, he had open heart surgery. Now, those first couple of weeks were incredibly hard. We lived in Children's National for 2 weeks. I was suffering from just having a baby and also mastitis and trying to figure out like you're sleeping on whatever their little version of a bed is, but it was terrifying. And there was a night where he kicked out one of his tubes. And so then they had to like rush in a bunch of doctors to try to fix it. And then they gave him medicine and it caused his heart rate to go up way too fast than it should have been. And it was like a journey, that whole 2 weeks of like going up and then coming back down, going back up and down. But we finally got to bring him home, and he has been special ever since. I mean, he is incredibly smart. He is obsessed with Spider-Man. You don't look at him and think that he has a heart issue. In all honesty, you don't look at me and see I have a heart issue. It's just by the scars that are on our chest. And every day, I just am so thankful for those doctors at Children's National, for the doctor who even paid so close attention, because I know what it's like to be a person who has CHD, and now I know what it's like to be a mother and get that news and then have to sign the piece of paper and hand them over to a doctor to go cut their body open, and the fear that lives in that. But every day I look at him and he is full of life and so excited about everything. And I wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, nobody wants that for their child. But he gets to stand out there, and together we work with the Children's Heart Foundation, and we do walks, and we raise awareness so that people know that it's so common and that it doesn't mean that your life's over either. And I especially find it important because I have been, at one of the walks that I was at, there was another little girl, her name was Madeline as well, and she had had a couple heart surgeries. I think she was about 15. And she said to me, so you have a heart issue and you had a baby? And I'm like, yeah, I did. I'm like, they take a lot more pictures, and I had talked it over with doctors and everything was fine. And she's like, well, I hope I get to have a baby someday. And now that I kind of see that you can, maybe I'll be able to have one. I'm like, maybe you will. And I think in that moment, it was for me realizing that my story about Alex was one story, but then also there were people that were looking at me as a woman who has been through these things. And her parents even said, she's like, thank you so much for talking to our daughter. And I'm like, listen, I'll tell anybody the story because they need to know that it doesn't just, your life doesn't stop. Even as a parent, it doesn't stop just because you got a diagnosis. It means you can keep going. And yeah, maybe there's some limitations here and there, but it doesn't mean that everything is horrible and awful and that you can survive it. And so I see that every time I go through things, and I see it with Alex. And that's why I just keep wanting people to know that sometimes you get bad news, and sometimes it's things that you think can break you. And you do fall apart. But that doesn't mean you'll fall apart forever.